So I think one of the tricks to really kind of getting proficient at Box2D is understanding what's going on underneath the hood and understanding how it's going to be different than the way you're probably used to making Flash movies or Flash games. With the old way of thinking, you probably had sprites or movie clips in your Flash movie, and they were smart. So if I were to make a movie that had a bouncing ball in it, my bouncing ball sprite would probably be fairly smart. It would have an event.enterFrame listener, and in this listener, I would move my ball around. I would have it, probably have a little velocity and keep track of the velocity every frame and move the ball by an appropriate amount. Maybe I'd detect whether I was underneath where the floor is supposed to be, and if so, I would reverse direction so it looked like it was bouncing. Do all the stuff to kind of basically move the ball around, make it really look like a bouncing ball, and make sure it bounced off the floor. All of that would most likely be done in my little bouncing ball sprite itself. It would be a smart little object that would know how to move itself around on screen. So with the new way of thinking, you really have to kind of throw out the way you're used to having objects move around on screen. You still are probably going to have sprites or maybe movie clips, but they're going to be dumb. They are not going to take care of moving themselves around the way you're probably used to in other Flash movies. Instead, you're going to have this B2 world object. And this B2 world object is basically the evil mastermind that controls everything. It is a mathematical model that uses all sorts of Newtonian physics and other stuff that I've forgotten since senior year of high school to make all of your objects move in a realistic way. It is the thing that is going to be in charge of the collision detection. It's the stuff that's going to be in charge of keeping track of every object's angular velocity and linear velocity and all of that stuff. Your sprite may have an event enter frame listener, but all that listener is really going to do is move the sprite to wherever this B2 world object tells it to go. So understanding this new way of thinking about the world where your sprites are really kind of dumb and this other B2 world object controls everything will really help you understand how Box2D is supposed to work. That being said, it's kind of weird coming from a Flash world where you've got sort of these smart sprites and moving into this world where your sprites are now kind of dumb and everything is being controlled by this other object. And come to think of it, there's a lot about Box2D that's weird if you come from the Flash world. Just as one example, Box2D comes with a vector class. It's called a B2Vec2 that when you first look at it, looks an awful lot like a point. They've got a lot of similar functions. They both have X and Y coordinates, but everything works just slightly different so that the two classes are completely incompatible. You can't pass a point when a B2Vec2 is expected or vice versa. And some functions, like the normalize function, look the same in both classes, but actually behave slightly different. And of course, none of this stuff is anything like the vectors that are available in Flash CS4. The two systems also have completely different units. Flash likes to measure everything in pixels, Box2D likes to measure everything in meters, and we'll be talking more about that later. Even when it comes to something like rotation, Flash likes to use degrees, and Box2D likes to use radians. There's a whole bunch of other weird little differences that you'll run into along the way. Most of it isn't major, it's not catastrophic, but it's just enough to kind of bug you. Just one more example that you'll see later. When you define a rectangle in Flash, you're usually defining the X and Y value of the upper left coordinate and then the height and the width. If you're defining a box in Box2D, you usually define the center point and then you define a half width and a half height. It's almost like you're defining a circle, but of course it's a rectangle. And of course it's a little weird if you're used to defining rectangles the Flash way. So what's the deal? Are these guys stupid? Did they not think ahead? Do they not know how to program? Well, no, of course not. They're not stupid. Stupid people don't spend their time writing physics engines. They're too busy making comments on YouTube videos. The deal basically is that Box2D came from the C++ world. And since then, it's been ported to a bunch of different languages, including Java, including ActionScript, including even Python. But all of these ports still look very similar to the C++ version. And so while there may be built-in classes like points and rectangles in ActionScript, That stuff just wasn't available in C++, and so that's why you've got these homegrown versions of some of these classes that look and act very similar to Flash versions, but are sort of incompatible. The bright side to all of this is that if you ever need to port your code to a different language, if your Flash game ever becomes so popular that you want to make a version of it for the iPhone, for instance, you'll be able to do it without having to learn an entirely new physics engine. Luckily, the Box2D portion of your game should still look very much the same when you move it over. So with all that being said, it's time to leave most of our PowerPoint slides behind and actually start coding some stuff. Yay!